What's the cringiest thing you've seen a bride and groom do for their wedding? At a classmate's wedding. They were young, maybe like 22. 23. There is apparently a caking tradition in some parts of the country, where when they cut the wedding cake, the couple feed each other a bit and smear each other's faces with cake as a joke. The bride had absolutely made 1000% clear to the groom she did not want to be caked. He did it anyways, and not just a small smear, but full on smushed the slice in her face. She was stunned initially, then got up, face full of cake, yelled, "You asshole, I told you not to do that," and then ran to a back area in the reception. The groom tried to fuel but the bridesmaids/mother of the bride stopped him. So he sat at the head table awkwardly while half the wedding party rushed off with the bride. She stayed back there for like an hour. They eventually did let him back there to check on her. We could hear her crying and them arguing. The rest of the reception came to a screeching halt until one of the bride's aunts emerged and directed the servers to clear the tables and put on some music. They got divorced 2 years later. This seems to be a fairly common predictor. If partners aren't on the same page about the cake thing, and the one who thinks it's funny disregards their new spouse's feelings on the matter, it's a bad sign for the longevity of the marriage. Happened at my niece's wedding. Her new husband full-on shoved that cake in her face and she lost it. Almost exactly what you described, except she never got over it. From that point forward for the rest of the night she was in tears, or screaming in rage. The wedding was literally ruined. A lot of people left when it became obvious that it had turned into a big shit show. I spent most of the reception outside smoking pot with various guests young and old, so that was kind of fun. They're still married. My dad's mother and stepfather owned a bar restaurant back in the 60s that hosted the occasional wedding reception. At one such reception, the husband caked the wife, even as she was asking him not to, knowing he would do it. When he did, a fist fight broke out between the newlyweds that soon involved much of the wedding. As far as I know, they were married for a long time after. At the reception line, after the church wedding ceremony, the bride had a large bottle of her favorite perfume and sprayed each guest with it, female and male, whether they wanted it or not, as they entered the banquet hall. Some guests complained that the smell of perfume was so strong that they lost their appetite and couldn't partake of the banquet. Why would she do this? The bride said she loved the fragrance and wanted to share that love with everyone celebrating with her and her new husband. They sang their vows to each other. Neither had a singing voice. Vows were generally batshit crazy, like submissive in the bedroom, and not asking about where she was going. The auto-tune microphones were a terrible idea. Their vow songs shared a chorus and it was awful, and they expected the guests to sing along with the chorus. The vows singing lasted 20 minutes. Pure cringe. The groom sang his vows. I honestly had to stare at the floor and slow breath to not laugh and get through it. My cousin did this. He played the guitar while singing his vows. He doesn't know how to play the guitar or sing. Thank fuck there wasn't a guitar, because I may have had a stroke. Invite all their Facebook friends and expect 700 people and like less than 100 show up. I knew a couple who didn't specifically invite anyone, just made like a public event on FB or somehow assumed people would know when/where it was and show up. They were confused and offended when almost nobody came. I wasn't a guest, I was working the wedding. The bride got drunk and sat on some other dude's lap for 2 hours and flirted with him, while the groom sat by himself at the head table with a defeated look on his face. I wish I knew how the couple is doing now. Yikes. Not the groom and bride's fault. But the pastor marrying them talked about his marriage and his kids for 20 minutes. He was obviously going for something of showing what marriage will be like. But he full up was talking about how his daughter, Kelsey, learned to walk this way, and his other daughter's first words were this and that. And that he and his wife make love throughout the house because that's what you do when in love, etc. Bride and groom had to stand there holding hands for 20 minutes right in front of him as the other 150 of us had to listen about his sex life and his kids. Oh God, you just reminded me of an acquaintance I knew, didn't go to the wedding but heard from a mutual friend who was there, where the pastor marrying them told the couple to divorce their friends under the promise that it would make them a stronger couple or some shit like that. And they followed that advice. So pretty much after the wedding and reception, they just never again talked to any of the friends they had invited to celebrate their big moment. I thought they would be divorced within a year, but turns out that they're still together. But yeah, apparently married couples aren't allowed to have friends. That is probably the single worst piece of advice I've heard in this thread. They bought an apple orchard after leaving the city to live a simpler life, and really doubled down on the apple theme. Apples everywhere, on the tables, in baskets all around the venue, on the podium where they got married, pictures of apples hanging everywhere, small fake trees with apples tossed under them. The dude marrying them had an apple tie on, apples somehow incorporated into every dish for the reception. The cake was shaped like an apple. It was really fucking bizarre. They sold the orchard a couple years later because they had no idea what they were doing. The ceremony also was the name reveal. They changed their last name because they didn't want to be stuck to their heritage and didn't want anything to hold them back. Turns out they changed their name thinking they could erase their mountains of debt or at least hide from it. Turns out you can't live under two legal identities. I've known a few couples who've changed their name to something distinct, i.e. neither partner's original last name. But they meant it as a symbol of their relationship, not a way of hiding from a credit rating. Oh, I have two. 1. The bride decided to sing as she walked down the aisle. She was not a particularly talented singer, and she was singing over a Carrie Underwood song so we could all hear the original vocal track. She finished walking about halfway through the song and then stood there and sang the rest of the song at the groom, and all we could do was sit there and watch. 2. Different wedding. They began the wedding with the groom playing an out-of-tune guitar and singing to the bride. They were sitting on chairs in front of everyone, legit 400 people, and the bride was clearly uncomfortable, which made everyone else uncomfortable. That wedding also included a foot washing ceremony, and when the bride put her shoes back on she tripped on her dress and fell flat on her face. They hadn't done the vows yet and the ceremony stopped for 20 minutes to deal with the nosebleed she gave herself. Not the bride and groom but the bride's father. I was the best man. They married young after she fell pregnant. It wasn't planned, but they clearly loved each other and it was the right thing for them to do in their eyes, both Christian. Anyway, come the wedding day I'm sat next to the bride's father at the reception and I can see he's looking at his prepared speech repeatedly. I can see phrases like not ideal, would have preferred not to welcome you into the family in these circumstances, etc. Just before the groom gets up to give a speech, the bride's father excuses himself to nip to the loo, leaving his speech behind. I'm not ashamed to say I swiped it and then pleaded ignorance when he returned. In the end he stood up and muttered a few words about love and then sat down. I never told the groom and I'm happy to say they're still happily married 20 years later. Update, blimey, that blew up. I never expected this to be noticed, but thank you for all the very kind comments and awards, smiley face. I was at a wedding when I was 8 and instead of the bride and groom getting up to make their speech thanking everyone, they had done like an awards show. So the DJ opened up an envelope, announced their names, they were handed an awards statue, a Barbie and Ken doll, and proceeded to thank everyone in the form of an awards speech. In the right hands, it would have been funny, but the bride and groom are incredibly shy by nature, so it was just awkward. I'm in my 30s now and I still remember this. The minister, or pastor. Used to date the bride and gushed about how wonderful she was. Told the groom if he ever died not to worry, he'd take care of her. I was shell-shocked. I so wished I could think of a reason to ask the couple for a copy of the video of their wedding but couldn't quite find a legit one. Probably my cousin's wedding. The food was really bad. And I mean really bad. Things that were supposed to be warm/hot were ice cold and completely undercooked. There was music but nobody was allowed to dance because we don't want people to dance on our wedding. There was also no alcohol. Not a single drop. But the worst thing was the seating arrangement. They didn't plan on families/friends sitting together. I don't know what they were thinking. I was sitting on a table with complete strangers. They even separated our grandparents from each other. After an hour my grandmother stood up, walked over to my grandfather and both declared that they are leaving now to the restaurant down the road having something good to eat and a beer. I joined them as well as my parents. It didn't take long that people noticed that our seats were empty. Really easy to figure out since nobody was allowed to dance or walk around in general. We got a call from one of my uncles where we're at. After we explained why we left he said you are right. This is bullshit, and we ended up with 20 guests from the wedding in that small restaurant having a fun evening. I still don't know why they even bothered celebrating their wedding. They also never invited us again. That's actually a good thing because now I don't need to find an excuse why I can't join their future parties. What's the cringiest thing you've seen a bride and groom do for their wedding? Leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel if you wanna see more videos like this one.